Oh, so I guess I'm making my first video back about one of my most controversial takes. I mean, yes, it's controversial to a certain type of person. People who seem to be getting more common within not only the gaming industry, but many forms of media. This isn't a new phenomenon by any means, but what does surprise me somewhat is just how accepted their viewpoint is. That art is subjective. I criticize games a lot, and many other things. Over time, I have become a very critical person. This didn't come naturally to me. I was born a very gullible person, actually, believing what others told me and assuming I was mistaken when there was conflicting ideas. As more of my life has gone by and I've discovered just how much I've been lied to, manipulated, or simply fed falsehoods that became widely believed to be true, I started to change my tune. Interestingly, many comments I get on this channel tell me that I take gaming issues too seriously, or that I'm too invested or too critical. But I'd like to offer a rebuttal. When someone tells me that, well, they're just video games, they're not that serious, I immediately know that this person has less credibility by default. To them, certainly it might not be that serious, but I am not just some dude with a YouTube channel who's played a lot of games. I am myself an artist, and have been one for a very long time. Making video games has always been a dream of mine, and something I've dabbled in a lot over the years. I've made a few mods, I've made prototypes for some original projects, and it's not the only art form I enjoy creating. Most of my channel art is done by me, with the only exception being my chibi caricature. I, of course, make videos like this, but I also have another channel where I make non-gaming related work such as music videos, short films, and visual effects shorts. I'm also a passionate writer, scripting most of my work on this channel now and writing all of my short film works. I'm not here to throw shade at another artist or pretend I'm better than them. My background is simply context to show one of the reasons I personally am invested in this industry. But there's a much more important component to this that I think gets ignored by the average person far too often. Video games cost money, but that itself isn't important. What is important is that they cost time. And of course, money is time. When you pay $60 for a game, if you make $15 an hour, that's 4 hours of your life given simply to have access to play a game. But then the game asks more of you than that. If you want to experience it, you have to spend time on it. So many modern games don't even respect your time, and that alone is worthy of criticism. We only have so much time to give in the first place, which is why even free-to-play games can be criticized for not respecting your time. These people, myself included, are asking for you to give up your most precious resource in exchange for experiencing their creations. It's this very notion that builds the foundation of one of my personal core tenets of creating art. Does it have a reason to exist? But how does one justify that? Well, it's fairly simple. See, why would you create a clone of a game like The Sims if The Sims already exists? What makes your copied homework better than the original? What makes it worse? How does the average working class person justify giving so much of their precious time to experience my art as opposed to someone else's? I would, however, argue that competition doesn't work the same way in art as it does in other products. If you buy a can opener, you don't really need to buy another one until the one you currently have breaks or you lose it or something, right? But if you buy a game, well, you can always play other games as well. The limited resource of time is always at the back of people's minds, but it's not the same as already having the tool you need to perform a certain task. Of course, certain games might scratch an itch that no other game has yet to mimic effectively. A good example for me would be Bloodborne. Nothing hits quite the same way, even within the same genre, from the same developer. An opposing example might be Need for Speed. Decent arcadey racing game series, but doesn't scratch the same itch as like Burnout Paradise or BeamNG.Drive. Apex Legends versus Insurgency Sandstorm, Soul Calibur versus Tekken, Battlefield or Call of Duty. But I'm getting off topic. This is why the subject of video games is important to me, and to many others who themselves may not want to be involved with them as a career, but for those who do care deeply about these things and already know this stuff, what has become the common defense against criticism of the things they like? Art is subjective. This is a powerful defense, too. It's hard to argue against, isn't it? It's subjective, so your criticisms don't matter. Oh, this game isn't made for you. Don't like it, play something else. But at what point does art become objectively bad? Is that even possible? The answer might surprise you. Yes, the answer is yes. Some art is bad. You can like bad art. No piece of art is for everyone, blah, blah, blah. But where is the line? At what point does art become objectively bad? Let's look at an example. Palworld. For the record, I like this game. I think it's pretty solid, has good potential, and I think the lawsuit against it is ridiculous and greedy. Devs like Scott Cawthon simply don't come around often enough. But what could we say is objectively bad about this game? I'd say the creature designs. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some cool ideas here and there, but so many of them are such amateurish copies of existing Pokemon designs that it's kind of hard to look at. If you haven't ever played or engaged with Pokemon in any way, well, first of all, who are you? Please give me your perspective on the world because you're a very rare breed. It's literally the most valuable IP on the planet. Pikachu is more recognizable than Mario at this point. But also, if you haven't seen Pokemon before, this might not matter to you. But once you have, well, it's hard to argue that the Palworld designs are not copies, or even that they're better than the originals. But more than that, the designs already exist. Yeah, they're based on real-world animals, but the art design is so specifically similar that it can no longer justify its existence. The only reason many of us justify the existence of the game is because of all the other things surrounding it. Yeah, it copies ideas from Pokemon, but there is such a gigantic shift in the soul of the game itself that makes its existence valuable. It's doing things with the genre that no one else has done. It's giving fans of the Pokemon series so many things that Game Freak never had the balls to do. Now, was anybody specifically asking for Pokemon to have guns? Probably one guy in a basement by himself. That's Argus. We don't like to talk about Argus here. But in general, no, that's not something I've ever heard anyone clamoring for. But full character customization, full-fledged co-op open-world adventure, alternatives to being forced into trainer battles, new ways to engage with your creatures and carve your path in this pretty cool world that became the most beloved IP since forever? Yes, and Palworld offers those things. It also has a little more maturity in its approach to presenting the world. Creatures can die in this world, true villains exist, violence, slavery, and it openly acknowledges that this entire concept is akin to slavery or cockfighting. And you can be evil. Pokemon has always been pretty clear that it doesn't want to give us those things. And that's fine if they don't want to, but they need to move aside for the people that do. Don't come after them. I'm getting off topic again. Clearly I have a lot to say about this stuff, so let's just move on. I think it's an objective fact that many of Palworld's creatures are directly copied from Pokemon with alterations too slight to really justify their existence. I also think the art style is way too similar. So I think in a vacuum, these creature designs can't justify their existence and are objectively bad. But outside of plagiarism, what else can make art be considered objectively bad? Well, I have a few ideas. Let's look at acting. When can an actor be considered to be giving an objectively bad performance? One example might be when the performance they deliver doesn't portray the character they're playing in a way that connects with people. Sure, some people might connect with the character, but does that make it no longer an objectively bad performance? Just because I had no game-breaking issues playing through Cyberpunk 2077 at launch doesn't mean it wasn't a messy launch that didn't work for most people. So, is objectivity up to popular opinion? Well, that doesn't sound right. Well, let me think back to a conversation I had about a character's performance in a game. I felt, as did many of my peers, that the person playing this character wasn't delivering a very good performance. There could be several reasons for this, such as bad writing, bad direction, or the actor just being inexperienced or not very skilled. The reason doesn't really matter because we just need to know whether a performance can be objectively bad. I feel that the actor didn't deliver enough emotion and didn't really feel like a real person as a result, even though it seems like their intention was to portray a very real person, someone relatable. And see, here's the thing. Their intention was incongruent with what was actually delivered. People argue with me that they knew real people who acted that way, so it was real to them. The thing is, I also know real people who act like this character in real life. But they aren't real people. They are fake, putting on faces, pretending to be something they are not. And while we all put on masks, I don't think that was the intention of this character. Well, okay, so is the character in the game also fake and trying to put on a face? No. This is supposed to be who they really are. They're not really trying to hide anything from the player character. Again, the intention is a genuine delivery of emotion that never ends up being delivered. And as such, it is objectively bad. But let's look at a more nuanced example. James McAvoy in Split. If you haven't seen this movie, I I can't really recommend it. It's dumb. It's a pretty terrible way to portray people with dissociative identity disorder, and just sort of messy and not well realized. But it could make for a decent case study, which is why I'm talking about it here. James McAvoy is captivating in Split. His performance is really quite good as he portrays the many personalities of Kevin. The problem is, his portrayal of these characters is held down immensely by the way the film presents them to the audience. Having him switch costumes every time his personality changes is so distracting it kills any nuance in the performance, along with a lot of the suspense. The dialogue makes this so much worse. Each of the personalities we meet describes very clearly who they're supposed to be and what their intentions are. As such, whenever Kevin is in the clothing associated with a particular identity, we know what that person's intentions are, and it kills any tension the film might have had. If he wore the same outfit the whole film, this might have worked better, where the audience is left to guess and speculate about what identity is currently spotlighting in Kevin's mind, never knowing what he might do next. It's an objectively good performance, destroyed by the context it's placed in. But how do we know it's a good performance? Well, in this case, I think if you were to watch the movie, but James McAvoy was wearing the same clothes throughout, you could readily determine which alter Kevin is being controlled by based on his speech patterns and mannerisms. Each one is distinct and reasonably believable. The funny thing about this is that so much of this art is subjective stuff comes from artists. But us artists also know that there is objectivity in the work we do. If acting, for example, was entirely subjective, why do we do multiple line reads, multiple takes to get the best delivery? Why would an editor sift through multiple takes of the same scene to select the best one for the final cut? Why would we reshoot something? Because it's all down to intent. Interestingly, another similar notion is that art is up for interpretation by the audience who interacts with it. This is another true statement at face value, but it has nuances that make it not a universal truth. Let's say, for example, you love horses. And to share your love of horses with the world, you paint a field with a bunch of horses in it. Your intention as an artist is to depict horses in a way that makes them look as beautiful to others as they are to you. Of course, elements of that are up to interpretation. Maybe someone might feel a sense of togetherness because of the herd sticking together in the field. Someone might get a sense of peace from the calming sight of a quiet field of peaceful animals grazing. Those interpretations are theirs, but the fact remains that you painted horses because you love horses, and it's perfectly fine that people take comfort in the painting for their own reasons. But if everyone who comes along and sees your painting says, "Wow, those cows are beautiful," well, something would feel off, right? You didn't paint cows, but everyone thinks that you did. Does this make your art bad? Maybe the painting is really detailed and has good use of colors and shading. The only issue is that the horses you painted don't look like horses. So the art isn't bad, but it's an objectively bad depiction of horses if they don't look like horses when they're supposed to. But what else would we have to change about the painting to make the painting itself objectively bad? Well, let's say that you painted this field of horses using only one shade of brown and then drew the outlines with black. Well, it's no longer going to look like a field of horses. It's going to look like a canvas someone covered in shit and then drew some cows in the shit using black paint. I'd say that's objectively bad. Is that an extreme example? Sure. But given some of the art that's out there, I don't think it's that unrealistic. But as an artist, how do you salvage an entirely brown painting with some poorly drawn horses on it? By saying it was your intention to depict them in an abstract way. That it has more meaning than a beautifully painted Monet piece that is almost photorealistic in its depiction of a nature scene. Now, I have to be careful because it's starting to sound like I'm saying abstract art is objectively bad. That's definitely not my intention. Plenty of abstract art exists that I think is good art. My intention is to point out that there is objectivity in art, and it often has a lot to do with intention, context, and the technical side of each medium. Am I saying that artists who depict things in unusual ways are bad artists covering their tracks? Not necessarily. The notion that objectivity exists in art isn't really up for debate. No one in their right mind would argue that painting Amanda Palmer eating a Microsoft Zune with a spork onto the side of a frightened piglet using only fecal matter as your pigment is good art. Like, come on, man, just let the piglet live his own life without being covered in a shit drawing of a shit singer eating a shitty piece of technology with a shit utensil, all depicted using shit, which it is already covered in head to toe. So, regardless of how long-winded this video is, no matter how many analogies I make or how much I attempt to appeal to reason, The people who typically believe all art is subjective will likely never be convinced otherwise. Asmongold actually said this very well. He said, "You can't reason a person out of a position they didn't reason themselves into." So why make the video at all? This video is for people who want to be critical about art and are tired of getting shut down and made to feel like their criticisms are invalid, or that they take something too seriously. When someone hits you with a response, "art is subjective," just drop the discussion. Don't tell them that their opinion is invalid, even though a stance like that absolutely diminishes their credibility. Don't belittle them, just know in that moment that continuing the discussion with someone like that is a waste of your time. It may be sometimes reasonable to just briefly and politely explain that you feel that there is objectivity in art, and enjoying art that might be objectively bad isn't wrong or shameful. In fact, I would say guilty pleasures are kind of dumb. You shouldn't feel guilty for enjoying something, unless maybe if that something is immoral. The fact is, you can't really control what you enjoy. If it turns out that something immoral gives you pleasure, your best bet is probably to seek some alternative, or in the worst cases, professional help to combat any impulses that you might have. But that's all a separate discussion. At the end of the day, liking something objectively bad, like the movie Independence Day, isn't wrong. I fucking love that movie. It's dumb, but it's one of the things I like about it. I don't try to pretend art is subjective to justify my enjoyment of that movie. The movie is bad, but it's enjoyably bad. Unlike the game Firewatch, which was a giant piece of shit. And while I enjoyed it at first, now knowing how it plays out in the end makes me hate it and ruins any level of enjoyment I'd ever glean from it in the future. It's okay to dislike things. It's okay to like things. But let's not shut each other down because, oh, well, it's not a big deal to me, or because it's subjective. A lot of people like to just say, well, maybe you just don't like movies, or maybe you just don't like video games. Maybe you're just a negative person, maybe you're just a cynic. But the thing is, I wouldn't talk about these things so passionately if I didn't like them. I don't go around talking about the latest League of Legends updates or World of Warcraft updates because I don't like those games, so they're not relevant to me. It doesn't bother me whether they have a good update or a bad update, because I don't care. I talk about ESO updates because I like the game, and if they do something wrong, it affects me, and if they do something good, that also affects me. And it frustrates me when people misrepresent the medium that I enjoy. For the longest time, I was told that video games cause violence, and you shouldn't like video games. You're a bad person if you like video games. And it pissed me off because I knew that wasn't true. I was never a violent person. I didn't like violence. I didn't like pain. I didn't like causing pain. I'm way too empathetic to do that. So it really annoyed me that people were misrepresenting the thing that I cared about. It was people who didn't understand the industry they were discussing, trying to explain to people who did understand the industry or liked the industry why they liked it or what was wrong with liking it and all that stuff. And it doesn't really work that way. So no, people being critical of something aren't doing so because they just want to be assholes about it. Either they're outside the industry and don't understand it, or they love it and they care about it. It doesn't necessarily mean that they dislike it. So take the time, understand why someone feels the way they do about something, and be good to each other. Or be assholes. I don't know your group dynamic. And with that, I will see you in the next one.